We never really think that much about it. It's just always there. And that's just how it works.
The water never gets created or disappears. Water is, millions of years old on the earth, and all it does is recirculate.
If you start with water in the oceans, it slowly and constantly evaporates, goes up into the air, and creates clouds. As the clouds move along, they eventually create precipitation through rain and snow. And some of this precipitation ends up in your yard, and most of that will become groundwater.
Some of it, especially in larger rainfall events, or if there's a lot of impervious area, you end up with what's called stormwater runoff. You exceed the capacity of the ground, the land, to absorb the water, and it runs off. And it runs off, it always has, but it can run off naturally into swales, which make their way to streams and creeks, and eventually to lakes, rivers. And in our case, it goes to the Mississippi River, moves down, and goes back to the ocean. And the cycle just continues.
As we build more buildings, pave more surfaces, and build more roads, there's less and less places for water to absorb naturally, and more stormwater. And that's not the issue. The problem is that most of these surfaces aren't clean and can carry pollutants into the water.
Because what happens is it's not just water that runs off, but there are all the constituents that get picked up by the water as it runs off.
Also, especially this time of year, the leaves that are falling off the trees by the second all have nutrients in them that will impact water quality.
Things like leaves, grass, in the summer are, they're plant material. It's organic matter, and so they contain nutrients. Primarily, key ones are phosphorus and nitrogen, and those, that's part of what goes into fertilizer. So those nutrients essentially are plant food. So that material, grass clippings or leaves, when it gets into the street, essentially it just sits there in the street until the next big rainfall comes along. And then what happens, that stuff gets washed up, and everyone knows this, it gets washed down the drain. It goes into the storm drain.
And once in the storm drain, it travels.
And so, what happens then? Well, storm drains essentially are inlets into the city's storm sewer, which conveys all the stormwater runoff. So we have a rainfall. The storm sewers convey the stormwater, the water itself, but they also convey sand, silt, other sediment, oil and grease, and then the organic matter. Stuff that's on the land gets washed into the storm drain, and it gets carried. And where does it go? It typically ends up in ponds, lakes, streams, wetlands.
The leaves and their nutrients start close to home, but eventually make it back to the oceans.
In the North Metro area, it might go to Spring Lake. It might go to Rice Creek. Eventually, it generally goes to the Mississippi River.
The stormwater does have impacts on every waterway that it touches. Most notably, at the mouth of the Mississippi River, there's a large dead zone. It was first noticed in 1972 and has grown in size and impact since then. The dead zone has such low oxygen levels caused by all the nutrients and chemicals that run through waterways across the country that there's no ocean life in an area that's larger than 5,000 square miles. But there are small changes you can make that will help add up to a big difference.
What a homeowner could do, there's, I guess, three main things that I've thought about. One is, first, your fertilizer practices. This could be at any time, spring, fall, whenever you're fertilizing. Just use moderation. When we fertilize, we tend to over-fertilize. In many cases, we don't need to fertilize at all.
Along with that, you can make sure your yard waste gets disposed of properly.
In the summer, grass clippings are an issue. If you don't really want your grass clippings to go into the street, mulch them or bag your grass clippings, and if there's excess that goes into the street, sweep it up and remove it from the street.
And in the fall, pay extra attention to your leaves.
Keep your leaves out of the roadway, out of the street, because they'll get washed down, and they're higher in nutrients like phosphorus, and so they're really a good source of plant food for the lakes. Either rake them up and bag them, or I actually mulch mine and reuse it. Do something like that rather than allow the leaves to get in the street and stay there.
Because once they're in the street and the rain comes, the phosphorus has already begun its journey downstream to local rivers, local lakes, and more.
For when that fall snow melt or fall rainfall comes, or sometimes they'll sit there if it's a late fall. You know, if like I have a couple trees that drop their leaves late, they'll sit in the gutter potentially if I'm not careful, and there'll be snow on top of them. Then in the spring there will be a spring snow melt, which is really high in pollutants, high in nutrients, and so they'll make their way there eventually, whether in the fall or in the spring. And so it's really an issue of trying to keep your leaves out of the street, out of the gutter.
For North Metro TV News, Danica Peterson reporting.